So this is my UI and user experience evaluation for Zombie Ubisoft, and this has been recorded on the 10th of the 1st, 2023. So the covering statement, so I'm writing this report dedicated towards some issues I've found quite tedious within parts of the user interface in the title Zombie. I have suggested towards making the UI feature much more streamlined and simplistic that will also have a positive impact to the user experience. So the contents of the Zombie UI and user experience. So the three main UIs I'll be covering on here is the scanner UI, the inventory UI, and the minimap UI. So the scanner UI features gameplay loops to help progress quicker and making it easier for the player. The minimap UI details the benefits of how it helps the player to navigate around the map, but that it does seem clunky and intrusive. The inventory UI stabilizes gameplay, letting the player slow down and take their time, but at the cost of usability. So your introductions and findings towards this. So for your positive feedback loop side of things is focus on the scanner UI, which helps the player find objects and makes it easier for them to identify and locate. Introduced early on to the game and has an emphasis on helping progression. It can have cameras to help visualize more of the minimap. So what's so good about this? Although it halts movement, it encourages players to use this for key points in the game and the user experience. You can feel the motor vibration of when it's scanning for features and acts of the camera itself, which is very juicy and satisfying to use. It also modifies gameplay features like the minimap to help with the player's surroundings. Load times for this are very snappy and very clear to the player, and makes for interesting micro interactions from areas that are being scanned to just opening up the UI itself. So the balance in between this, so your positive and negative feedback loop side of things is your actual minimap UI. So the positive loops for this, it helps the player find their way around locations in the game and details about cornered off areas and accessible ones to which the player can see clearly thanks to the glowing icons in there. And your negative loops around this as well. So it gives something else to the player to focus on, which can make the player take their time with the gameplay and slow it down. So this also helps with the user experience. And it does become more useful as the player progresses through the game, showing more in the game. So how is this bittersweet? The minimap shows off a lot of the map, but at the cost of taking up a lot of space in the player field of view. To add parts of the minimap, it does require the player to hack cameras to expand it. However, the feeling of being able to see more is satisfying and rewarding to the player when this does come occurrence. The radar ping of it to detect nearby enemies is useful, but annoying over time with having to press a button to activate it manually. And the last part is the negative feedback loop, which slows the game down, which is your inventory system. So this keeps the user experience stable by having the player manage their equipment in a separate UI, which also slows gameplay down. It has more emphasis later onwards as you start to expand your inventory. And as I mentioned, it slows gameplay and gives player time to manage what they need and what they don't. So what went wrong with this UI? So it is used as a completely separate UI compared to the pause menu and takes longer to load than the rest. It uses a scroll bar to find more of your items, which becomes tedious, but also frustrating, especially later on in the game. Interacting with items feels clunky, and you cannot move items anywhere other than towards different inventory space, and it features minimal, satisfying micro interactions in this UI, but players are forced to use this for progression, which can affect the user experience.
At the end of the day, who lives and who dies comes down to one thing: preparation. Research your surroundings, scavenge for supplies, stock up your safe house, and do whatever it takes.
So other alternatives that I've picked out on here between Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 4. So for Resident Evil 7, it features a clean, simplified UI where you can toggle the placement of items or rotate them while not fully pausing the game. And Resident Evil 4's approach is a more complex but a fun UI where toggling the items to fit in your inventory feels more like a puzzle, but it doesn't pause the game and takes up the entire screen. So for my recommendations and conclusions, I will be focused on the inventory UI. And my plans are to remove the scroll bar and make the inventory menu easier for players to manage their items, making the user experience simpler. Have the player utilize space in their inventory by organizing, rotating, and placing items almost as if it was a puzzle on itself. Make it feel less clunky and more juicy and satisfying when pressing, moving, and hovering over the buttons. And I believe the fixes I have suggested could fix some of the issues and will hopefully make the UI and user experience more streamlined. So, from making concepts with this, so the original screenshot I've taken here is what the original inventory UI looks like from there, with the scroll bar, with the separate inventory space. Also, you do have the item up there to detail what your item that you've clicked on. And the concept version I made in Photoshop with photo bashes from images from the actual game that I've screenshotted is basically a larger area with basically almost a Resident Evil 4 styled inventory. We're basically, so what I've also done as well is created a UI flowchart breakdown. So the original one is here on the left. So basically, from what I've worked out on here, it does branch out into multiple segments of the UI. So there is slightly more choice, however, bearing in mind that it does feel a lot more clunky in terms of when you use it. Whereas compared to the one that I made, which is the edited version, which is inspired from the concepts I made in Photoshop, it's a lot more straightforward and slimmed down. So it works very straightforward and does it really quickly, especially with the game having, when you pause it, it doesn't pause the game completely. I believe this would be a lot more useful in practice. So for the inventory item placement breakdown, this has all been developed from myself in Photoshop, from photo bashes, from screenshots from the game of all the items. So how it works is they're using the crosshair and they're hovered over the item they want to move or choose. So they hold the button down until it completely goes red. And then the item itself will turn red with a red outline glow and the crosshair being red. All the parts around that are being used up are all red, and the ones that haven't been used up are all white. And basically, the player can click on the buttons, which would also turn red, as well as flipping it around and rotating it to select where they want to put the item. And then basically, they click on the crosshair, and then that's that, and then the item has been replaced. So as I entered into Figma, basically, this is what my UI breakdown would look like in practice. So when the player is idle, they would press tab to open the pause menu, and it would open up this segment on here. So you have hotkeys to actually select where your weapons want to be from 1, 2, 3, and 4 by just clicking on the items. You have a description of the item underneath, spare slots to upgrade over time. So if you want to click on an item, so you hold it down until it goes to full like that, and then you move it around to move it to wherever you want it to go to. So in this case, you also have different segments to put it in until you drop it off where you want it to go. And then these items also become available as well. And you hold it down again to lift it back up and then put it back to where you originally want it. So as well as if you hold down the item and move it around, you can also rotate it across to wherever it seems be. So you can leave it like that if you want to, or you can move it around. And same again, hold down on it, lift it up, switch it about, and you could just leave it on there, for example. As well as you do also have your icons on top as well, where you hover over them, where it would either take to your objectives, your menu, the inventory itself, which is already the one on here, or the map. So if you want to switch it back, click on this, and it will switch to like that on there. If you want to switch to your objectives, same again, it will switch to that on there. And you want to go back to your inventory, it switches back to your inventory on there, and also appears with your shortcut icons. Now, as well as there's also another shortcut key towards your menu. So if you want to click on that, it will switch to your menu. And if you want to escape from that as well, press the escape key and it brings you back to normal as well. That is the end of my presentation. I do hope that what I've presented in Figma shows a good example of the changes that could be potentially useful for the Zombie U inventory UI